All right. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Welcome to the Liquor Store Podcast. It is Jill. We don't have Matt today. He's out finding other delicious, wonderful bourbons. So he'll be here next week. But we do have a special guest today. We have Mike Catrati from Casella Père et Fille Imports. He is one of our major importing partners. And we're going to talk a little bit today about the importation of wine and how that kind of all comes together. And basically how wine gets to the United States and gets on your table. So, yeah, very exciting. Welcome, Mike.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for doing this with us today. So I wanted to give a little bit of context first and foremost, because I feel like a lot of people don't know how the liquor industry works. That there's many different parts that kind of come together to kind of get that bottle on the shelf for you to buy. So this month is actually the 100th anniversary of the passing of the Volstead Act, which is the 18th Amendment, which basically, is prohibition. While it seemed a little short-sighted at the time, I'm sure there was, there were many social forces at bay that were kind of, pushing America to this decision. But anyway, so we had prohibition. As we know, prohibition kind of makes everything, kind of created a black market for wine, beer, and spirits. And then we, what was it, like 13 years later, decided to repeal it. So that was
a bad idea.
It was a bad idea. It was a bad social experiment. So yeah, that was in 1933 that we repealed it. But then that kind of gave the states the ability to choose how they were going to regulate alcohol. States have basically two different ways of doing that. So Indiana, where we are right now, we have a 3-tier state, which is where we have the wineries kind of sell to a wholesaler, which is what you fall into, and then the wholesalers they do. They sell to retailers, which is what I do, and then we sell to the end consumer. This is interesting because there was a bunch of checks and balances kind of all worked into this. You get taxed at each level. There's a licensing for each level, and it's really good for keeping bad spirits out of the market. So you don't have a lot of tainted alcohol. So that whole thing that was happening in Punta Cana doesn't happen here as much. Actually, they have a lot of bad liquor in the UK, I've read, which is really interesting. But yeah, so that's kind of what the 3-tier system and how that works and the benefits of that. However, there is kind of a downside to the 3-tier system because with each level adds a little bit more money.
That's right.
Onto the onto the final product. And that was created actually to curb drinking. Did you know that?
I did not know that specifically, though there has always been a bit of a prohibitionist mindset in the regulation of alcohol. Even though it was allowed after the 21st Amendment, the attitudes, especially at that time, were a little more prohibitionist than they are now.
Sure. And you actually come from the second kind of control, which is a control state. Can you tell us a little bit more about the control state?
So yeah, there are quite a few control states in the U.S., and that's where the state itself is in some facet of the liquor business, or the alcohol business. In Virginia, where I live, the state of Virginia controls the retail sale of distilled spirits, only distilled spirits.
Oh, interesting.
So beer and wine can be wholesale, and retail can be privately done. The retail of distilled spirits is strictly handled by the state. They have their own stores for that purpose. They have a great big giant warehouse. Now, interestingly, wholesale spirits distribution can happen. The state could buy brands directly from the distillery. They can also buy them from a third party. So there are some brands where they go through a distributor in Virginia and then in turn sell to the state. Another state where I do some business is Mississippi, which is a very controlled state where both wine and spirits are handled by the state, warehoused by the state. The state of Mississippi allows you to be a retailer of wine or spirits, but you're buying everything essentially from the state. And then there are brokers that represent different brands, like my brands or whatever, different liquor brands.
So in a state like that, I guess we'll get into this later. So I have a friend who actually has a wine shop in Jackson, Mississippi, and so he just has to, and it's a wine shop, so it's a boutique wine shop. So he's like getting all these kind of cool boutique brands. So like if he wanted to have one of your wines, does he have to go? He has to go through the.
It's essentially purchased through the state.
Okay.
There's a broker who handles our product in Mississippi who represents it. He's a private individual who is a licensed broker, but he is funneling that purchase through the state.
Oh.
So both of them get a cut.
Oh.
So there in Mississippi, that product is probably a little bit more money
Okay.
than it would be here or in other states.
So really, it's all about taxing and getting all the
It's
money.
all about revenue, yeah.
All right, so that's kind of a quick overview of how liquor and wholesaling kind of works. But now I kind of wanted to turn it over to Mike. He works for Casella Pere et Fils Importing, and I just kind of wanted you to tell us all about that.
Oh, okay. Well, the firm is Casella Pere et Fils. Fran Casella, is the owner and founder of the company. He founded this company in 1994, so we're 25 years old this year.
Wow.
He is a master sommelier, one of those couple hundred Americans that have reached that status. He's one of the early ones. I don't know which number American he was, maybe the 12th or something like that. But he was early on.
Do you know what year he got his MS?
Maybe 1989.
Okay.
It was a while back. And he started this firm. He worked for people you know. He worked for Kermit Lynch.
Oh, wow.
He worked for Peter Wygant, also well-known specialty importers. And he founded this firm in 1994. I went to work for him in 1997. So I have a pretty long history there.
Yeah.
And we started out with primarily French wine, and then we've expanded into wine from all over the world, as you know. And also we do a little bit of beer in our local market in the East Coast, and some spirits too. Very small amount, boutique spirits, and usually they go along with wine. Maybe a winery that has grappa or mar or something like that.
Okay.
We might have the spirits to go along with that.
Okay. And what was like? I guess how does Fran come about and curate his portfolio? So, I mean, like the thing about importers and what I always like as a retailer is that like I can look at the Casella brand on the back of label and know that it's like been vetted. It's a great wine. Also Kermit Lynch, Peter Wygand, Becky Wasserman. Like I love those importers. Neil Rosenthal, all quality producers. So like, how does he go about curating his portfolio?
So he's very hands-on and does not delegate that part of the responsibility. He might have some people that help him source some wines as far as recommending him things or sending him samples or doing the initial legwork. But he will ultimately taste everything and decide whether it belongs in our portfolio. And he tends to like things that are very true to type, that have good fruit acid balance, that are true to their either their varietal or their place, that maybe are not excessively oaked unless that's the typical style for that wine. That's generally how he does it.
I mean, so when he started, I mean, obviously he had worked for Kermit Lynch and Peter Wygand, but so I mean, was he like over in France and being like, oh, well, these people could use some representation? Like, how does one?
I think that in
find
his
out?
case, I think to that extent that may have been true. I was not there at the time, so I can't speak to that. I remember having heard a story that he basically went on a trip to France and acquired a bunch of samples of wines that he liked and wanted to represent, and brought those samples back to the U.S. and then pre-sold the samples, and that was his first container of wine, and got him on a start. That's if I understand the story correctly, is what he said, and I think that's probably true.
I mean, I just wonder if he like wandered into like a winery and is like, "Hey, your wines are pretty good.
Well,
Can I
that does
represent
that
you?"
does happen occasionally. That sometimes happens, and people send him samples sometimes, and you find something that way. And it happens to anybody in
Sure.
this aspect of the business. And you, I'm sure, receive unsolicited samples all the time.
I do.
Yes,
I do.
and some of them might be good.
And-
And the same thing happens here. And as I said, he has some people that he trusts and knows that are on the ground in France and Germany and Spain, and they might find things and recommend them to him, and then he'll investigate them personally.
Oh, that's neat. So how many producers are in the portfolio?
I want to say 200. That does include some of the things that we handle for direct distribution in D.C., Maryland, Virginia, where we have our own distribution business.
Oh.
And includes the beers that I mentioned as well.
Okay. Oh, neat. So not only are you an importer, but then you have a little side racket. And is DC, what's the this is in Washington D.C.
You know, I've never done business personally in D.C. I think that it can be daunting in some ways. That I think that, and don't quote me on this because I don't work there. You know, getting into the district to do business, I think, costs you plenty. But they actually have a little less regulation about some of the other things that we talked about with the control states and stuff like that. Once you're doing business there.
Well, interestingly enough, when I was doing research about the 18th and 21st Amendments, I found that states cannot tax booze that is to be imbibed on a national park or on federal land.
That's correct.
So Washington D.C. would be a really big national park.
Well, not the whole district. The whole
Right.
district is not a national park. But well, for instance, military bases, for example, that would follow along with military bases. Military bases are also not subject to that state regulation that we talked about. You know, there's the feds, there's the TTB, the Alcohol Tax and Trade Bureau that regulates. That's the first level of regulation for us. You know, that you have to have everything
Right.
just so for them, and then the states can tack on whatever they want, and they do. But if, for instance, if you're selling to a military base in Virginia, they're not necessarily subject to those state rules. I mean, you're probably filling them anyhow because you're not wanting to do business just on that base.
Right. And so you talked about the TTB. So what are the hoops and the that you have to jump through to satisfy their requirements? Because
Well-
I know it's always an issue when we have like a new wine come into Indiana that they have to register with the TTB, get things approved, and it's like, well, there's just so much that goes into that. So
Well, and keep in mind here, I'm just a salesperson on the ground and not a compliance person. And as a matter of fact, companies have whole either people or departments devoted to compliance, which is not my area.
fair enough.
So that being said, I just know there's a lot of paperwork, including your labels have to meet certain standards. And then you have to make sure that your import procedures are just so. Of course, you have to go through customs, and they make sure that everything is just so when the product enters the United States. Of course, that's no different. Alcohol is no different than any other product in that regard.
Right.
A lot of importing alcohol is the same as importing, clothes or whatever else. It's just that every governmental entity, on the way from the producer to the consumer with alcohol is throwing in a fee or a tax or something.
Of course.
Yeah.
So you said you spoke about customs, which kind of brings us to the next my next question is, can you bring us from a grape, well, I guess the bottle at the winery, and then to basically your warehouse? Like, how does that happen? Because I remember when we ordered a container of rosé, and it was a lot of logistics that went into this. And I was just really kind of mind blown about how many people and how many steps it took to get the wine from the winery to basically our big red shelves. But since you know how that works, why don't you tell us more about that?
Well, again, for alcohol, it's pretty much the same as for any other product. I mean, think about this. You have a guy that made it, and somehow it's got to get here. So it's got to be packed up, put in a truck or a train, taken to a port or an airport, put on a vessel, brought over here, handled by our customs, allowing it into the country. And let's say everything is okay there. And then it gets on another truck or a train or a plane, and it goes to its warehousing destination, and processed or whatever, and then trucked and packed up again and sent out to you. So now between us and that winery, there's something called a freight forwarder, and that's a company who specializes in logistics and in handling that whole process, which is almost like 7 steps of getting it from the winery or from the manufacturer to our warehouse. And that's their whole job. And they may also be involved in the customs aspect. You have to have a customs broker that's here in the U.S. It's an American company, but they might be somebody you engage yourself to handle that aspect of the business for you, or it might be under the aegis of the freight forwarder. But that freight forwarder is the guy that you've hired to get that product from.
Thus adding another level of cost.
Of cost, right? You got to pay the guy. And a freight forwarder can be a big multinational company with offices and all kinds of clientele, or it could be a guy with a cell phone and a computer that just knows what he's doing. I don't think I would go that route in our case, but technically,
well, if you're small,
technically, it's somebody that really knows how to push the paper.
Interesting. Let's see. I have some more questions about that. So, typically, how long does it take to get through customs?
That I can't really speak to. I mean, I know that I see arrival dates from the freight forwarder, and usually.
How often are those accurate?
The arrival dates from the freight forwarder are usually within about, depending on where it's come from, whether it's Europe or South Africa or whatever, usually within a week, either way, accurate. And then I see the stuff show up in my warehouse about 3 days later. And it's not very far. We usually ship our stuff into Norfolk, Virginia, and we're in Winchester, Virginia. That's about a 4-hour drive. Sometimes Philadelphia or Baltimore or somewhere like that. So what has happened in that intervening time is part of the process that I don't know anything about.
So
that's the customs broker, getting it through customs, getting it onto a truck over to our warehouse.
Because I mean, you do hear about containers getting stuck in customs,
and that does happen.
And then we had that government shutdown, and that
Right.
I'm assuming that's kind of what delayed a lot of things this spring. But
I do recall in your case that entered into the equation at some point.
yeah, because we were shut down for like a month and a half.
I don't remember the length of time,
It
but
was-
it was a long time, and I do recall that somehow entering into the issue.
Yeah, that was interesting, and it was just another kind of like, oh, you hear this on the news, you think it doesn't really affect you, but it affected me. I didn't get my rosés until late May. It was sad for everybody. But then, so even with that kind of like how politics kind of play into our industry, I mean, it's political anyway, because like each state has their own laws, and, Indiana just got their Sunday sales law passed, 2 years ago, and it was very political. It was, and then so we now have this like impending tariff situation going on that are supposed to go into effect on Friday. So what does that look like for your company?
It's a little bit of uncharted territory for all of us, I think. And I don't know exactly how it'll play out. We're all going to have to wait and see. I mean, obviously, it's going to be increased costs for everyone for the affected products somewhere along the way, and I don't know how that will play out. And you can try to avoid it in some ways, or focus on other product, or in some cases, I'm sure that there are producers and importers that are just eating the tariff in some cases, if they can afford to do that, especially if it's some sort of major brand. I don't know, but they can't do it forever.
Right.
If they see it as a short-term thing, they might do it for a little bit, or to make one deal happen or something like that. But if it sticks, it's gonna affect everybody.
Because I know that Target at one point said, "Oh no, like we're not going to do business with you if you raise our prices." But I mean, that's not really a sustainable method.
No, it's not realistic. And in this case, it's a large tariff.
It is.
I mean, as these things go, 25% is a big number.
I mean, what would you say raises a bottle of wine a 25% tariff? Is that like $5?
It just depends. It depends because it's going to be assessed on the value, the stated value of the wine when it comes in. So,
I mean, I kind of feel like this is going to create, people are really creative when it comes to this sort of thing, and I feel like loopholes will be found, and
I don't see that. I think that the loopholes are going to be people are going to be pushing other product.
Right. I think we're going to see a lot less French wine specifically.
French, well, what's affected is French, German, Spanish. French will be the most obvious because of those categories. That's the largest that we see. So we're gonna notice that first.
So our Parmesan
I was gonna say and the Parmigiano Reggiano people are not happy about it, I'm sure.
Right. I mean, why the cheese? Why the cheese? Yeah. So that's. I mean, I just kind of feel like the whole thing, it kind of brings in, when you just think about wine, it seems like such a romantic, sexy industry, and it's, we're being affected by all the things that, basically by airplanes is what it's coming down to.
Yes, it's a very unusual. We're like I said, uncharted territory.
Right.
All of us.
So yeah, that's all interesting stuff. I mean. So what does the future look like at Casella? What kind of things are you guys looking for? What kind of things are you seeing coming into the market? Are your producers, asking about?
We're always looking for the value component. We're always looking to provide value to the customer, value to the drinking customer ultimately. And to paraphrase something Fran said one time, it doesn't take any great talent to find good, expensive wine. But you have to work hard to find good wine that's not expensive. I don't know. I paraphrased that a lot, and I'm sure I cleaned it up. But that's what we do.
It is true. I mean, we actually have a lot of really great value brands from you. And I always have to say that, like, there's a lot of kissing of frogs involved in the whole thing. I mean, to get like $15 or less and a good wine is like, you got to work at it.
Yeah, it's not easy.
And, I always say wine is fleeting because regardless of the wine that you're drinking right here, right now, like, the next vintage could be completely different, or, the next batch is just kind of like a little bit off. And so it's always like, enjoy the wine that you have right in front of you. Well, anyway, with that being said, I mean, I have noticed that you guys are, you brought us some of the first bag-in-boxes that, premium bag-in-boxes wine, which are 3-liter boxes with basically 4 bottles of wine in it. I mean, is there new innovation coming in that regard?
And you mean packaging-wise?
Yeah. Have you considered Tetra Pak?
Tetra Paks, that is something that we have looked at with some things. Of course, looked at different sort of keg options. it's less easy than it sounds. The Tetra Paks seem to be pretty common. Uh, none of those have worked for us at this point. But,
Okay.
it doesn't mean that that won't happen, and we're not open to it. And we're certainly seeing a lot more interest in canned wine, and have talked to a number of producers about that. So I'm not sure. That's above my pay grade. But whether we'll see that in the future or not.
I mean, I'm always a fan of innovative packaging, but I know that Tetra Paks are very popular in Europe, and like every time
I'm actually surprised that they're not more popular here.
I am too.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a couple of grocery brands have kind of taken that on, but it just really hasn't taken off like it has over in like Italy.
Yeah, I would be. I mean, if it were up to me, I would be pursuing more the value can than I think the Tetra. But it seems crazy to me that the Tetra hasn't taken off more.
Well, anything else you'd like to say about your business or that people should know about wine importing?
Well, just that there are a lot of steps. I think that this is the invisible portion of the alcohol industry. This sort of middleman between the winery and you guys, and just to understand that there are a lot of steps involved, there are a lot of people involved, there's a lot of tax and fees involved. So just because you went to, Portugal or Spain on your holiday and had a bottle of wine for €1 from a winery doesn't mean that that's what it's going to cost when you get it here.
For sure. Yeah. We get that a lot.
Yeah.
And it also, it's not like we can find every single label out there. I mean, we try. I mean, I try definitely, but people are always asking, "Oh, I had this in Greece," and so then I'm like, "Have you seen it in the United States?" And there's a lot of times where I will have, you can get it in New York and get it in Chicago, but you can't get it here. So,
Well, and that's where that whole state-by-state thing comes into
Yeah.
play. Small importers doing business in more limited areas. There's upsides and downsides to our system.
So do you guys carry wines that are imported by other importers in different parts of the country, or is that like an exclusive
We
thing?
do
with your-
try, Fran does try to be the exclusive U.S. importer. We are not always. I mean, there are certain situations where, for whatever reason, somebody else is grandfathered in and he really wants the product, or there can be various reasons why that happens. But for most products, yes. For most of the wines we bring in, we're the exclusive U.S. importer.
And are you in all 50 states?
I believe so.
You don't cover all of them? though?
I do not cover all of them, thank goodness. No, so and I think we might be in Canada and the Caribbean too.
Oh, wow. You don't have that territory? That would
I
be
do
nice.
not. Yeah, wouldn't that be nice?
I'm gonna
No,
go to
somehow I haven't gotten to the Caribbean or Hawaii. Have not been added to my list. I just come to Indy.
Oh, well, it's a wonderful place. We have lots of culture here,
I like it.
right? Well, since we've talked about your delicious wines, we're going to drink some of them.
Oh, wow, that's
now.
cool.
Yeah. So we have the Jean Reverdy Sancerre. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this?
So this is, as you said, this is Sancerre. Sancerre is the place from which it comes in the Loire Valley of France, in the eastern part of the Loire Valley. Sancerre, when it's white, will always be Sauvignon Blanc. That's their white grape. This particular one comes from a winery called Jean Reverdy et Fils. Jean Reverdy was one of the original Casella portfolio wines back in 1994. And we still are carrying it today. The current owner is Christophe Reverdy, the son of Jean.
I feel like Reverdy is a very popular name in
It
this
is.
part.
So this comes from a town called Verdigny, Verdigny, which is very close to the actual town of Sancerre. And there are many families of Reverdy making wine there, and I assume they're all related somehow. Nobody has volunteered, a family tree to me before, but yeah, there are many families named Reverdy making Sancerre, and a lot of good families named Reverdy making good Sancerre. So this will be Sauvignon Blanc, unoaked. They don't use any oaks, all stainless steel. Very dry. You can hear us sniffing the wine.
You
That's
can
very- that's sort of-
experience the sniffing.
Yeah. And Christophe River doesn't make a lot of wine. It's not a big estate. You know, I'm going to guess and say 10,000 cases is what we're talking here, and most of it is white. If you have red grape in Sancerre, it's Pinot Noir, and you can make red Sancerre out of it, but they make more Rosé Sancerre. So we
Which
see
is delicious.
Yeah, Rosé Sancerre is fantastic.
Especially, we have the rosé of this particular producer.
That's
and
right.
It's
You
one
carry
of my
both
absolute favorites.
the white and the rosé, but the majority of it is going to be the white, the Sauvignon Blanc, and Sancerre is a really considered a benchmark of Sauvignon Blanc. You'll often hear other producers of Sauvignon Blanc from whether they're from New Zealand or California or wherever describe their wines in terms of Sancerre. It's like Sancerre. It's not like Sancerre. Whatever. But clearly, that's a benchmark. You know, it's a reference point for people.
Some markers for Sauvignon Blanc usually are like grassiness, or in the case of New Zealand, it's more like grapefruit. I usually say things like, "Oh, I don't really like Sauvignon Blanc," and then I'm wrong because, well, that's just how I do it. But I've just been there's just a lot of really kind of uninteresting Sauvignon Blanc out there. But 100%, I will always drink Sauvignon Blanc from the Loire Valley, and most definitely Sauvignon Blanc from Sancerre, just to be that person, so I can be fancy and say Sancerre. I really love this wine because it is really refreshing. It's, a great aperitif. It's wonderful with, oysters or, like salads, grilled chicken, that kind of lighter fare.
Exactly. Yeah. Like many Sauvignon Blancs, but this is going to be maybe a little more nuanced, a little less maybe aggressive than a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, maybe a little lighter, drier than an American one. And those are generalizations, of course, but I think they hold.
Yeah. So when people say, "Oh, I don't like Sauvignon Blanc," I'm like, you should just try a Sancerre or a Pouilly-Fumé, which is right across the
So
street.
Pouilly-Fumé, yeah, just upriver, I guess, technically, very close by. So Pouilly-Fumé, also always Sauvignon Blanc, unless it's Chasselas, and then they call it Puy-sur-Loire, just to confuse us.
Yeah, so we have the Jean Reverdy Sancerre, the Big Red Liquors. I believe that the price is somewhere in the $21 to $24. I don't have.
That's a good price.
Yeah. Usually, a lot of Sancerre kind of starts out at 25. I think.
Yeah.
I usually see it for that.
That's the going rate, and it's very popular in the U.S. People, it's one of the few French wines that are pretty well known in the U.S. Aside from can't really count champagne. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, a lot of people kind of know. They'll usually get like Pouilly-Fumé and Pouilly-Fuissé kind of mixed up, but Pouilly-Fuissé being Chardonnay from the Macon in Burgundy. But that's getting more expensive these days, and that's a whole nother podcast. I totally forgot a spit bucket. Sorry. Oops, we're drinking
spitting.
it this time. So yeah, that's a really great wine. It's just wonderful for gatherings of friends. It's definitely something I drink while preparing big meals. Sometimes I put it in the food.
Good. Great a splash of this in the dish.
Good for sauces. Kind of brightens up any sauce that you might have. And then the next one we have.
I guess I'm gonna have to chug this whole thing.
Right? I'm sorry. I realized it only after I poured it. I was like, oh well, we're gonna have to be adults about this. The next one is one of my absolute favorite Spanish wines that Mike has ever brought to us. It is called the Es Lo Que Hay.
So this is unusual. This is, in fact, this is a good representation. Sancerre, the Jean Reverdy Sancerre, very classic, well-known area of France. Everybody's familiar with Sancerre. This is sort of a more new wave, new world, not new world, new style of wine, if you will. This is a wine, Es Lo Que Hay, which basically translates "it is what it is," which is a good name for it. is a wine made by a gentleman named Norell Robertson. He's a master of wine, originally from Scotland. He created this winery. He calls, and my Spanish is very bad, but I think it's El Escocés Volante, which is the Flying Scotsman, because he also consults for people as well in their winemaking. And so he is making wines from very old vine parcels of vines that he's found in Spain. In particular, this is from the Calatayud area of Spain, in northern Spain, and it is a Grenache-based wine, or Garnacha.
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 I don't speak Spanish either.
And so it's a very intense, almost has the intensity of like Chateauneuf du Pape. It's really an impressive wine. In this particular vintage that you got, this 2016, it's kind of fun because he snuck a little something else in there. I think that when you had bought this wine before, they if there's still some 2013 on a shelf somewhere, it's a beautiful wine maturing very nicely. It's all Grenache. In this case, he had access to a little bit of Syrah and a grape called Moristel, and this was from a vineyard that technically falls outside of Calatayud. I think it's just Aragon it would fall in. So that's why I don't think he put Calatayud on the label this time. I mean, it's his address, so it's on there.
The address.
But he didn't put it on the front label. So he just calls it Old Vines Grenache, Garnacha. And again, there's no wood on this wine. It's all done in cement tanks.
And aren't I'm like, maybe I missed this, but I'm like, the vines are like 75 to 100 years old.
Yes, that's correct.
And why is that important?
Well, I mean, these older vines, you get more intensity of fruit. You get less fruit, unfortunately, which is why people will replant at a certain point. But here in Spain, I guess in this part of Spain, and I have not been to this particular place, these ancient vines are not uncommon.
Yeah, and what I was reading up from the 2013 vintage, that I mean, they get like, I don't know, like 3 inches of water a year, like something ridiculous. So like these vines really should not exist. And, like it's just they just exist because they want to be, and it is what it is. Like we're here, we're making this grapes, and it's like the most like pure form of Grenache. Old vine Grenache from this part of the world. It's just kind of a really awesome expression of like terroir.
Mm-hmm. And it's pretty big wine. You don't get a sense of it being overly alcoholic or anything, but it's weighty.
No, it has some really dark, like, I guess cherry. I mean, really, really dark cherry, but not like ripe cherry. But you do get a lot of minerality out of it. I mean, there's this like kind of like ore.
It's like a graphite, almost like a graphite
and there's
note.
like a graphite note. We've all stuck our pencils in the wrong side of our mouth, and we know what that tastes like. Yeah, I mean, this is such a great wine. I'm always so enamored with it. It's great with, some jamon, some cured meats, even like pastas, red sauces, pizza.
Oh yeah, this would be great with a lot of things. And my understanding is you're pretty high altitude vineyards for Spain, especially too. It's like 1,000 meters, which, that's like, Mendoza, Argentina elevation.
Wow.
That's very high for European vineyards.
So, wow. Yeah, this is and I didn't even price this one yet, so I think it's somewhere in the $20 range.
It should be probably $24.99. Something like that.
$24.99. Yeah. I remember 2 years ago having it, and it was just became my favorite red wine for so long. So, yeah. So look for an email on that, VIPs, because I'll be doing that soon. But yeah, well, I just this is a really great conversation and a really kind of fun look into that part of the liquor industry. I want to thank Mike for coming out here all the way from
pleasure.
Virginia to do the podcast. No, just kidding. He just so happened to be here. And he is a good sport because I kind of, bum rushed him with it. You didn't know he was going to be on video either. But anyway.
No, I thought this was strictly an audio thing. Yeah.
I'm like, my hair did not, pass the test, but it's happening anyway. Es lo que hay.
That's right. Very good.
Anyway, well, I just want to thank you, Mike, for coming and doing this with me. I want to thank Fabian for being our producer.
Thank you, Fabian.
And so thank you all for listening to this if you still are. And Matt will be back next week. So cheers.
Sorry I drank mine.
I don't know how to turn off.
That's always the awkward part.